It's a great pleasure to be a moderator. I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity. And we have eminent speakers and the panelists. Now it's a pleasure to invite Rajiv Menon, Head of Assessments and TX Services. I think we can take some 8 minutes. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I had a hearty lunch. It's great to be speaking amongst some eminent panelists from representing various companies, universities, etc., with many more years of experience than I do. I'm going to be speaking about something that probably doesn't get discussed too often, which is about assessments. There's a lot of focus on learning. There's a lot of focus on learning platforms. If you take a walk around the exhibition today, you will hardly find an assessment company. Most of them are talking about learning, which is great. There's a huge amount of technology intervention in learning. But I'm going to be speaking a little bit about how technology has started impacting assessments, and probably look at ways in which we can start looking a little deeper by using technology. As you all know, assessment practices have evolved, and with specific reference to India, the last 10 years have been extremely a period of extreme and fast growth. From the days when I'm just taking one of the examples of conducting exams on paper and doing OMR scanning to do result processing, to completely moving most of the exams to the computer-based mode delivery has been a significant progress that we've done. Exams like CAT, GATE, etc. have all completely moved online, and thereby also bringing a lot of accrued benefits to the organizations that are conducting the examinations. And some of the examples or some of the key features that accrue to the awarding bodies and to the entire environment are fairly well known, so I wouldn't spend too much time on it. Things like transparency, security, providing an audit trail, ensuring that the exams are conducted in a secure manner, etc. All of these have achieved a greater amount of success under computer-based delivery mode. The second is the practice of digital evaluation. Many of the universities today are aware of it, use technology to scan the answer scripts and then get it evaluated on a computer by evaluators that are probably sitting in some remote corner of the globe, and that's to maybe put it at a much futuristic way. But today there are boards like the CBSE, there are universities like Manipal, SMU, etc., who have adopted digital evaluation in a very big way. And I don't see a reason why in the next couple of years almost every single university in India and exam board in India would adopt digital evaluation. The third is within classrooms as well, assessments within classrooms. From days, and I'm obviously not talking about all schools, but many schools today use innovative devices like clickers to gauge student responses, to understand student recognition of various concepts, provide feedback to the teachers, and then help the teachers to change the amount of stress given on a particular topic where if there is a gap that is found. But are we still doing enough? So the three examples I spoke about are probably hygiene benchmarks today in an education institution as far as assessments are concerned, using technology to pervade this part of life. But if you were to really look at it, are we really doing enough is a question that we should really ask ourselves, because all we have done is moved from delivering something on a paper-based mode to a computer-based mode. You've changed the playground from a piece of paper and moved it to a computer. But have we really leveraged technology to create that impact in assessments is a question that one needs to ask ourselves. Let me just jog our memories and try to give some examples of questions that we picked out from some significant exams, right? If you look at most of those exams and most of the questions that I put up there are questions that or questions that actually test only the knowledge level of the individual. It doesn't test the application of the knowledge itself. And some of these questions are part of examinations that decide the career or the position of a student, or the knowledge or the accomplishment of the student in a particular subject. So this is a matrix that most assessment and educationists would, assessment experts and educationists would be familiar with. Clearly, the need is to move up the hierarchy, go to getting into topics like evaluating, creating, and analyzing, get into that realm, and not get stuck on the remembering and understanding kind of a realm of the entire matrix. Most tests, unfortunately, today assess only the understanding and the knowledge. The second aspect of the system that needs to change is the way the output is transmitted back to the student. You give the student a grade, a mark, etc., but there is hardly anything that goes beyond that to the student to be able to improve. And I've put a couple of examples of typical marks cards that we carry, which then forms your passport to either higher education or a job, and there is nothing much more than some numbers there that either help the authority that hires you or the authority that allows you into the next stage of education to take a decision on. So can we use technology to improve some of these things? The answer is definitely yes. And the clear way forward, and this has been written about in many papers as well, is to get into continuous assessments, formative assessments, constant feedback to the learners, identify whether each and every concept has been understood by the person, and the person is in a position to apply it, and the application of knowledge is the most important measurement. Because if you don't do this, what would really happen is the demographic dividend that India talks about will completely peter down, and we will have something that we will end up with tons of people but no one employable. We don't want to get into that kind of situation. Therefore, the education system should adopt some innovative assessment practices. Quick run through of some of the examples that are there in some areas which needs to get into more holes, into large scale. Using audiovisual assessment abilities rather than asking questions of a paper, can use audiovisual audiovisual methodologies to ask questions and get answers for. Focus on games. Games today is synonymous with something that's outside academics, but using games and gamification of assessments is a critical way by which you can improve the effectiveness of assessments itself. And the last is, for example, there is a college in southern India that uses robotic cadavers instead of dead cadavers of human beings to simulate real body working conditions inside a body, and the students are asked to open it and perform a number of tasks, and the robo actually provides a real feedback as for each of the stages. Now this would enable the person to understand the working of the human body far better than if the person were to use, let's say, a dead body to do the experiments. The last couple of points. One is the power of data. There is a huge amount of data signature that is being left behind by every single student as he goes through the process, and the more the amount of digital intervention in learning, the more is the signature and data points available. It's important that we harness the power of data. We talk about big data. It's important that we harness the power of data to provide feedback to students and to teachers. The last couple of slides, again, I spoke briefly about a technology called digital evaluation. Digital evaluation allows a huge amount of feedback to go back to the students in the form of annotations, in the form of highlighting of text, etc., which can work to improving the student learning outcomes. The last part is, I think there is this constant debate going about how you can reduce evaluation burden on teachers. I think many countries today actually have people who are evaluating scripts being totally different to people who are actually teaching. Maybe there is a case for that, and using technology, this can be done in a very secure way. And I'll just leave you with the last slide. In a typical higher education exam today, student is asked to answer 8 questions, 5 questions out of 8. Assuming that all the 8 questions by itself can test the depth of knowledge in a particular subject, by giving students the choice of omitting 3 questions, and then using the output of that, the marks obtained by the student at the end of it, as a measure of the student's expertise in the subject, aren't we being unfair to the student and to the community at whole? So someone who gets, let's say, a 60% mark is actually probably answered only 3 out of the 8 questions. Technically, if 8 were to cover the entire width of the subject, is someone who just knows a small fraction of what is needed to be a master in the subject. And therefore, I think it's important that we change the assessment framework itself, remove this entire thing about providing options to students as part of the final examinations. The ideal solution, of course, would be to ensure that we do away with the end-term examinations wholly and just depend on individual, constant, every day, every topic evaluations and then aggregated into a whole to provide a degree, something that, let's say, the CBSE system has started doing through the CCE, but that's the need of the hour for every single other examinations of high stakes, which unfortunately today is not the situation. Most of us still have a final exam of 3 hours, which then decides the course of everything that you do. So while India has definitely adopted technology in examinations through some of the examples I spoke about, I think the opportunity for us lies in leveraging technology for improving measurement of learning outcomes and thereby impacting real learning itself. And I think that's the challenge before most of us in the assessment area as well as people in academia as well. And if we can do that, I think we would have done justice to usage of technology in education assessments. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we say that because we have almost 3,300 patents filed in these span of this 100 years. And they cover a variety of areas. Evidencing, secure evidencing of documents and transactions is one of the areas. And that's something which is relevant in today's context of assessment and how we do assessments and how we certify candidates. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the few of the challenges that our education system faced, and we have a potential solution. We can talk about that in detail. We have a stall right there. Anybody who is interested can come in and talk in details. So presently, I'll walk you through the challenges that education system in terms of degrees and fake mark sheets that we are facing today. So these are some of the headlines that we kind of read through in newspapers every day. These are some of the things that we have collected from various news articles or magazines. People say that there are fake degrees that are available for 5,000 to 25,000 rupees, and major universities are saying that for all prestigious certificates, you can say that 10 to 15% of candidates are giving or providing fake credentials. So this is something that's coming from the university side of the, officials and the university side of people who deal with these fake candidates, verification of these candidates. Next is why is this a challenge, or why do so many fake candidates are arising? The reason is that verification of these certificates or degrees or mark sheets is extremely cumbersome. It's a time-taking process. So to put in perspective, when a student registers in a course, it takes almost 3 months sometimes to get him verified. Same thing happens when a student goes out in the job market. When he applies for a job, he says, okay, I'm applying for a job. Nobody's going to verify, and by the time they're going to verify, I probably complete 6 months in the organization. And we'll see when it comes to that. So again, this is something, what we're saying that some of the recruiting agencies say that one out of every 5 resume is fake in some respect. Either they fake the qualifications or they fake the experience. Now, the question is how do we really solve this challenge? So this is a challenge that's been around for quite some time. Universities issue a lot of when they issue degrees and diplomas, they have various certificates, various features that are security features. They can introduce a security thread, RFID or something. So many things can be there. But the problem is the moment candidates photocopies the document, the whole content becomes diluted, and it's more or less reserved to the photocopy. So nobody is there to verify the authenticity of the photocopy of the certificate. So that's the area that we kind of work into, providing this document or document security. Even if it is photocopied, it is instantly verifiable. That's something which we talk about. So what essentially we're saying again, even there's a lot of caution that's been exercised while evaluating the students and institutes, and my fellow panelists, he was talking about online assessments and digital assessments. Again, you can assess it any way you want to, but again, there's a piece of paper that goes out, and that credibility of that piece of paper is only as much as you can verify it. So with all the technology in place, the verification and the fake degrees and certificates is still a challenge. Again, some of these are articles where we're talking of 1,400 primary teachers with fake degrees resign in Bihar. There are politicians who are submitting fake degrees. There's lots and lots of such articles that we have. Again, fake Jamia mark sheet racket. So, point is, this is a very, almost every day we will hear some kind of scandal about fake mark sheets or fake degrees or, fake experience certificates, fake salary slips. What we do is to create a platform of secure evidencing, ensuring that data is recorded and in a secured way and is instantly verifiable and without originators interference. So a university issues a certificate, it goes to the employer. The chain is that employer has to go back to university to verify it. Now what we're saying is you don't have to go to university. We are providing you a platform where you can instantly verify that certificate. And that's what we are saying. We're basically providing you a platform to create and verify, secure, whether they are certificates or documents, in any sense, whether they're mark sheets or experience certificates, training letters, anything of the nature. We are almost generating 1 million certificates in India today. NSDC is one of our primary customers where we are helping them generate all the certificates. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaur, for presenting in the given time. Who is the next presenter, madam? Is it mine? Any other presenter? I think. We have the two presentations. Now we will start the panel discussion. Let me start with me. I am Professor Raju, come from Andhra University, Andhra Pradesh. Andhra University is 90 years old. It was established in 1926, which was initially headed by Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, Professor, former President of India. The topic given for this session is very, very important. That is innovative practices in assessment, accreditation, evaluation and quality standards in higher education. Along with the skill development that we had in the morning, the assessment and accreditation are also very important parameters, and they create some check on the institutes and also to have a quality education. We have some of the standard accreditations like NAAC by UGC, NBA for technical professional courses by AICTE. We have a BRIC countries 2 years ranking and THE ranking and so on and so forth. Very interestingly, any institute is to the students, for the student, by the students. It's not just to impart education and offer degrees, but for the total development of the personality. So once we imparted education for the students, and there is always a need to monitor the institutes and universities, how they are performing, how they are providing teaching learning, whether they are indulging in research and consultancy and patenting and publications. So NAAC has taken more than 40 parameters awarding some weightage for each category, giving more stress on teaching learning, consultancies, external services, extra and co-curricular activities, whether they are maintaining ethical and moral values, and so on and so forth. Very interestingly, NAAC accreditation is considered to be the best because they award grading from the data supplied by the institutes and also physically checking in the campus. Similarly, MBA accreditation by HTE. Whereas in the other case, the QS and DHE ranking, they are also wonderful, but from the data supplied, they assess and give ranking. So there is always a variation in ranking adopted by different agencies. So this accreditation, as mentioned by Mr. Raju, coming to assessment, there is always a need for continuous assessment, and the way the exams are conducted, the way the papers are set, are also very important. And these days, people want, if the student write exam, by evening, the result should be out. So in that perspective, most of the institutes are going for online examinations, including only objective type. But unless we also go for subjective, the real strength in the subject for the students will not come out. So we should always, I suggest that both it should be subjective as well as objective type. That gives the real correct assessment of the knowledge acquired by the students. So for every institute, for every university, particularly in higher education institutes, the accreditation is a must, and it should be an independent, autonomous body. It should be unbiased checking, monitored, assessed, and given. This will enhance the competitive spirit among the universities. And if some institute is not maintaining minimum standards, there is always possibility for the government or other organizations to de-affiliate and close the institutes if they are not able to meet the minimum standards. So in this connection, I always feel that the accreditation should be made mandatory for all institutes. I am very happy UGC has declared last year, made it mandatory for all the education institutions to go for NAAC accreditation. So now people are moving forward. In most of the institutes, the faculty strength is very less. Student faculty ratio is very, very less. That is because the recruitment is not taken care very often. In some institutes, even after 10 years also, no recruitment is being undertaken. So if there is a accreditation, the government bodies also come forward to see that the recruitment is done as often as possible, so that the teaching learning process can be strengthened. So with these few observations, I am very happy to invite my panelists to discuss and present their views on this occasion. Now can I request Mahesh Soni? You not come? Okay. I request Satyadeep Saranjan. To take about 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Satyadeep Rajan from Perpetual Technology Partners. We're investors in the technology space with a particular interest in education technology. We make investments in Europe, and we work also very closely with companies in Israel and in the US. By way of background, my focus will be more on technology, which, as Rajiv pointed out, is now truly a disruptive force in the assessment scene. And he pointed out a few characteristics about digital assessments something that was coming to mind as I was hearing all of this was I recently saw a program on the IQ test, right? So the IQ test, it appears, is one of the oldest sort of standardized assessments there is, and it hasn't changed in over 100 years, is what I found out, right? So I'm not an educationalist, but I found that really interesting that, as the science and the quality of assessment, like he was saying, has in something as important as IQ, which we use, to make so many sort of, judgments on, potential and student sort of potential at a young age, is something that hasn't changed in 100 years. So I suppose both in terms of technology and in terms of the quality and nature of assessments, there's a lot of opportunity to grow and change things dramatically. And one of the big forces that is changing things now, as again Rajiv sort of alluded to, is the whole idea of big data. And this is an area where we're seeing a lot of new exciting startups. So a number of new exciting startups are there in this space. We're seeing machine learning being applied in very many interesting ways. And I'd like to just sort of maybe point to a few of the frontier areas where this is sort of heading out, just to sort of tease your imagination. We're looking at the moment seriously at a company that, for instance, does soft skills assessment based on facial recognition, right? So they're able to look at a person, the tonality of their voice, they're able to measure the facial expression, and they apply principles of machine learning and sort of big data to be able to give you a score, right? Now this is something that has traditionally been humanly assessed and even so very subjective. And there was an element there where again there was the point was raised about subjectivity of assessments. In fact, it's said that the interview, right, the interview in any sort of recruiting situation in a company is supposed to be the most biased and sort of imperfect part of the whole solution, largely because it is so subjective, right? So if there is an opportunity, I think, to use technology both in an academic setting and outside of it to improve the quality of assessments and be able to do things in interesting ways, I think that's a huge opportunity. And so apart from video intelligence and machine learning, I'd like to also point out another area where we are seeing very interesting startups, which is in the area of crowdsourcing, right? So I think that one way to eliminate bias is by having a large population of people make an assessment about an individual, his skill or his expertise. If you wish, one way in which this is done already it's already in use. Crowdsourcing is already used for rating favorites and likes and these kind of things for different areas, but it can, and we're seeing interesting cases of it being used in assessment as well. Another area that I'd like to point out, and I think many of you must be aware of it, it's in the area of plagiarism and sort of copying and cheating. You were referring to faking of certificates. I mean, people fake entire assessments that they turn in, a lot of other things. And an interesting startup which probably may have heard of is Turnitin, which can actually look at your essay and point out how much percentage of this. So today, I think most large companies in India already use this. You can't turn in new content, assess, etc., without it going through an automated digital test, right? So this is, again, as I see it, a sort of frontier of assessments, not in a traditional setting in a university, but nevertheless very interesting. So I think as we see advances in cognitive science and in sort of human brain project and these kind of very large, multi-billion-dollar government projects, there are a lot of key insights into how the whole assessment process can be improved, and that's where we're seeing a lot of action. One other area which I'll just sort of talk about briefly is accreditation. So we spoke about assessment and accreditation. In accreditation, I think there's almost a huge pressure now on the formal education system to really rethink accreditation, because online education has been moving so fast, and with MOOCs and everything else, the only one thing that is really stopping them and the adoption of them in an even bigger way is actually accreditation, right? So the fact that most online programs don't offer traditional accreditation, because traditional accreditation is rooted in the concept of a credit hour, at least in the West, right? Not so much perhaps in India, but I'm sure there's an equivalent in some way. So the credit hour clearly is an input measure, right? And is not really an output measure. So somehow, as I see it, we are talking about learning outcomes, and accreditation cannot be linked only with, how many hours of effort went in. It has to be based also on what came out. So therefore, if one were to be able to use in clever ways technology to be able to assess this, and that becomes particularly important because just today in the newspaper I was reading how India wants to sort of make itself a global center for education and sort of exporting education a big way to the world. I think online education is bound to play an important part, where you can then offer immersive experiences in the country. But if online education has to see more traction, then those efforts that are put in through online efforts have to be accredited. And this is a question for all the panel on how and what are the opportunities here. And that would be very interesting to hear what the perspectives are around. So that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranjan. Now may I request Professor Avinash. Not there. Professor P.K. Garg, please.
Good afternoon to all of you. In fact, if we see the scenario of higher education in India, it is quite alarming. Although a lot of efforts are being done by the government, by the institutions, by universities, by affiliating agencies. Now, as we all know that in 2025, year 2025, India will have the largest world population in the age group of 25 to 30. So that means we have a talented pool of young people if they are properly nurtured, if they are given proper education. At present, our gross enrollment ratio is of the order of 17% or so, which is much, much below the world average. So on the one hand, the government has the agenda to bring gross enrollment ratio to 27% to 30%. But at the same time, if we see what is happening to the colleges, let us take the example of the engineering colleges. No one could dare in the present scenario to start a new engineering colleges because the admission rates are going down. Some of the institutions which are not performing very well are on the verge of closing or closed down. And there are many, many reasons for that. We talk a lot of quality education, but when we talk of the quality, there are certain parameters. It is not input-based. Earlier, our approach was totally input-based measurements. If any university has 10,000 students and the other university has intake of 2,000 students, the university with the largest intake was considered to be the good. But today, the time has changed where it is the output-based education assessment. So all our assessment are quantitative rather than qualitative, and they are output-based. So we have to actually do the self-assessment of those parameters which defines the quality. Many, many institutions, and sorry to forgive me if I say private institutions, they have one single agenda that I should not have any seat left vacant. That is the single point agenda in the month of June, July, August and September. When we talk about the teachers, their qualifications, their selection procedure, their output, their achievements, Many colleges are silent on those issues. There is a chain. We have to actually take interest of all the stakeholders in this particular system. We cannot neglect one particular part and just focus on one part more. So students, parents, alumni, industries, teachers, they're all our stakeholders. So it is a holistic system, it is an integrated system, and we have to pay almost equal attention to all these. As we see the curriculum, in many of the universities, the curriculum have not been revised or it is not up to the mark. We are talking a lot about the multidisciplinary curriculum, where students admitted in a particular stream can take the subjects of the other stream depending upon the choice. Very good system. This is an international system, we should adopt it, but when it comes to the ground reality in India, we have the shortage of the experts, we have the shortage of faculty, teachers. So maybe we are not offering those, it is just on the paper. When we talk about the industrial projects, industry visits, inviting the experts from the industry, on this particular account also, our contribution, that means the contribution of the institution, is minimum. Outside, if we see the institutions outside India, developed countries, most of the funding is coming from the industry because they have the great industrial support. They have the alumni support. So most of the institutions, in fact, they are giving the students industry-based projects, and research scholars are given the problems which are of interest to the industries. Solution is worked out and given back to the industry. And that is how the industry is completely supporting. 80% of the funding is coming from the industry. Rest 20% from the alumni and other sources. While the scenario here is entirely different, it just reverse. We are almost 100% dependent of the government funding. And we don't get sufficient, and we cannot expect the sufficient funding what we require for our development. We have to generate these fundings for our resources. We have to strengthen the institute-industry interaction. Then the other important aspect in our education system when we say quality of education is the teachers' training. Teachers are to be continuously given training, and faculty development programs are to be sent to the institutions of higher learning to update their knowledge. And many institutions are not spending money in this particular aspect. We have very good schemes like the Gyan schemes of the Government of India. We have the RUSA scheme where we can actually utilize these schemes. We can invite professors from the foreign countries for one semester or maybe for more time, and they can interact with the faculty, they can interact with the students and actually update their system with the new technology and so on. Then online programs. We must introduce e-learning based module, online programs, skill-based development program in our contents, in our syllabus. Then accreditation, as many of my colleagues mentioned, it is must. Yes, it is must, but there are 10 to 12 accreditation agencies in India for different streams. Why can't we have one single window system, one single agency? And if we look at the criteria, all agencies have different parameters and different criteria. So this is one of the biggest problem in our country, that we have 10 to 12 accreditation agencies. If one institution has several programs, they have to invite sometimes UGC, sometimes AICT, sometimes some other council for accreditation of the program, and they have all different measures. And in spite of that, only 25% of the institutions are accredited. 75% are yet to be accredited. If you look at the R&D in India, what is happening is, because we have not been able to make the teaching profession very lucrative, very attractive. As far as the salary is concerned, the teachers, if they don't get salary equivalent to the corporate sector, they prefer to go to, any student will prefer to go to the corporate sector rather than joining the teaching. Now, if we look at the research scenario, what happens at undergraduate level, we hardly have any research. So the students from premier institutions, they get job after undergraduate education. But what happens, the students, those who are not from the premier institutions, they try to get they don't get the job sometimes, and they try to go for the master's program. So they enter into the master's program, and since their background is not so strong, so they poorly perform in the master's program also. They don't do good in the master's program. There is hardly any research component, or sometimes you don't feel like publishing even a single paper out of that work. Now what happens is, since the master's program has not been done seriously or knowledge has not been updated, sometimes they don't get job even after the master's program. So what they think is, okay, let me do PhD, I'll get a scholarship. So they join for PhD. And in PhD also the scenario remains same, and at the end of the PhD they get the job somewhere for teaching. So the graph is continuously decreasing as far as the research is concerned, whereas it should go up. UG level, if this is the research level, at master's level, this should be the level, and PG level, it should be the higher after PhD program. So this is the scenario which is going on in our country. How can we expect actually the best of the best teachers? And this is happening everywhere, including, we have the shortage of the teachers, including the IITs, NITs, and other institutions. So everywhere, this is the scenario. Employment is not there for our students. As the report says, 25% of the students are employable, 75% are not. So these are all the points which are of great concern, when we are talking about the entire education system, how to bring the changes in the system, how to adopt. We should not actually straight away adopt the strategy which is being adopted by the adopted internationally. We have to see at grassroots level, we have to see the national scenario, and according to the scenario, I think we have to work out the strategy for improvement in the quality of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Garg. Now, can I request Professor Rajat Gupta, Director, National Institute of Technology, Srinagar.
Good afternoon to all of you. At the very outset, I extend my thanks to the organizer for inviting me to the summit. I am honored, and NIT Srinagar is honored. Secondly, I compliment the organizer for selecting the topic, the higher quality in higher education, assessment, accreditation, etc. If you see the Indian scenario in higher education, there are around 35,000 higher education institutions in India. But unfortunately, when ranking is concerned, not a single institute of India is ranked within the 200 in the world. Having an NIT system and studied in IIT system, it gives me deep pain that why Indian universities are not in the ranking system, not in the top class. There are many reasons. We must think for the students because we are answerable to the students. The students, when they'll be passing out from our institutes, then whether they'll be recognized across the globe. If our programs are not accredited properly, then mobility of the students will be restricted. Moreover, the recognition of the students also will be limited. So scenario is very alarming. In this regard, I will only concentrate on higher technical institutes, learning system. And I will just talk about the outcome-based education. My fellow colleagues said that, yes, accreditation is a must, but for your information, I would like to say that for universities, NAAC is the agency which is under UGC. For all technical institutes, NBA is the agency which is not under AICT. It is delinked from AICT. NBA is an autonomous body. I am a core member of NBA team. So all technical institutes should be accredited by NBA. India is a vast country, and there are autonomous institutions, there are affiliated institutions. So there are two systems of accreditation. There are two categories of institutions, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Autonomous institutions are Tier 1 and affiliated institutions are Tier 2. So why outcome-based education? Earlier it was output-based education, means input, process and output. Now this has been changed into outcome-based education, OBE. What is OBE? OBE is a holistic approach dealing with all the stakeholders. All the stakeholders means the students, parents, employers, society, etc. And here, why you should go for OBE or outcome-based education accreditation? Because the mobility of the students, the recognition of the students, the license of the students, engineers will be having the license power like medicine, law education, etc. once it is accredited by this. Recently, India has undergone for Washington Accord. So this is the need of the hour. When it was input, output education, that was teacher-centric education. In the output-based education, this is learner-centric education. Learner-centric education means the student-centric education. Here, teacher is not the mentor, rather teacher is the co-learner. And here should be, this is continuous evaluation. And the curriculum should be flexible, not rigid. So these are the attributes of outcome-based education. And we must, all should try to go for this outcome-based education because this is the need of the hour. And once this is done, then we can say to our next generation is that we have provided a quality education to our next generation where they will be recognized across the globe. With this hope, I conclude that we all should come forward and extend our full cooperation to go for outcome-based education and outcome-based accreditation. Here, just I'd like to point out two things here, that in the NIT system, this NIT Council is the highest body headed by our Honorable HRM. In the NIT system, what we have done is that nobody prefers to come in the teaching system. We did survey, and from the survey we could realize that most of the students are going for jobs, not opting for teaching profession. Now we have introduced one scheme that is known as the teacher trainee scheme. In this scheme, what is done is that bright students should be included in the teaching system. So we have done we have given the incentive is that we will identify bright students who are willing to take teaching as a profession, and we'll select them and we'll give them full payment, full salary at the initial stage, that in the fourth year itself, and they'll be deported to IITs for completion their PhDs. Yes, we are getting some response for there. Similarly, in order to curtail this faculty, I mean, in order to fulfill the shortage of faculty, there is adjunct faculty provision is also there, means highly qualified people in industries who are interested to come forward to in the teaching to teach in the NIT system. They are most welcome with a package of 1.2 lakhs in addition to his own salary. So this is also lucrative, and we are getting some response with, from the industry people also. With these few positive things, I am very hopeful that yes, India will be in coming years will be one of the leading quality education institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rajat Gupta ji. In fact, as you mentioned that no Indian institute is in the top 200 world ranking, but unfortunately, most of the premier institutes are not going for ranking itself. Unless they go for ranking, they will not be appearing in the ranking system. That is another issue to be considered. Now it is a privilege to request Dr. Raj Singh, Vice Chancellor, GD Goenka University. Not there. Professor B.S. Satyanarayana, Pro Vice Chancellor, BML, Manjal University.
Good evening, everyone. I think, this is a very big topic, and I don't think none of us can do honestly any justice to it, and we will hardly be able to touch the surface. But I just thought I would take this opportunity to showcase, some success story of leveraging this outcome-based education process. And again, unfortunately, I think we are all into, close to 70 years of our independence. This public and private distinction has to first go. Stanford, Princeton, Cornell, they're all, private institutions, say they still, nobody distinguishes. But I think here there's a huge, 90% of India's actually outcome, good, bad, ugly, come from the private system. They are serving the country, and even the mission on Mars just had 1% of people from IITs. So first of all, we have to give up this mindset of public and private. If you leave out a few handful of government institutions, most of the government institutions do not have buildings, do not have faculty, do not have infrastructure. Equally, you have equally number of horrible private institutions and also unscrupulous private institution organizations. But at the same time, there are enough private institutions which are enabling this country. So I think we should give up this distinction between public and private. There should be only merit and quality. And that's why we are talking of quality, and quality based on accreditation, quality based on appropriate assessment, internal or external agencies. And also then what are the methods of evaluation which would enable them. And therefore, I think we have had some wonderful inputs from, I think, Mr. Rajiv, Mr. Ranjan, and also Mr. Makut, Muhammad. Talking about some of this assessment tools or technological enabling that is coming up. But then I think we have closed now 40,000 plus, nearly 40,000 institutions, universities, colleges all put together. If you're looking at engineering colleges, you have another 400, close to 4,000. So I just want to say that if we are willing to comply and willing to work hard, even in private institutions, we could deliver with all the constraints. See, nobody asks an NIT if there is no faculty, they can increase program, they can increase student strength, they can continue teaching. But private institution will be closed next day even if there is one faculty shortage. So in spite of that, because India doesn't have truly role models for private institution, I would like to, because again, they are going to deliver. Government will not fund, they do not even give time to recruit faculty even if there is shortage. It's not that the faculty don't want to do that. I'm sure the directors can say whether it's budget allocation, whether it's recruitment, huge constraints from government side, even if they want to. So I just want to take two case studies quickly. I know time is up. So 5 years back, I happened to head an engineering college called RV College of Engineering, Bangalore. On that day, we had about 4,000 students. We had about 320 faculty. We had done about 3 crores of research. We had all our programs accreditation due. So we looked at the new accreditation process and said that because today, there are, even within India, there are multiple agencies, internationally multiple accreditation processes. Though, Washington Accord has come, 17 countries are today signed signatories. India became a signatory last year. And I'm happy to say that for India's final approval, one of the institutions, NIT, Trichy and RVC were chosen when international observers came to approve of India's new accreditation process after a 10-year facilitation. And there we are happy to say we introduced processes where, we had looked at CDIO, the conceive, design, implement and operate process of accreditation propounded by MIT. ABET process, which is across US, EuroAS in most European countries. Of course, Singapore has a variation, Australia has a variation. We had looked at all of them and said, considering our compliance norms, how do we bring in teaching, learning, research, experiential learning and into the same academic system and deliver? And so in 5 years, 50 company-based courses with 30 of them setting up labs worth 25 crores. And over 60 crores of funded research happening from the same faculty who in the previous 45 years had done 3 crores of research, and also placement of faculty, students going up from about say 2.5 lakh per annum package to about 7.8 lakhs and top salaries going up to 1 crore. So the key is just leveraging the requirements in accreditation, building it into teaching learning process and not separately working for accreditation. We could do that. Or for example, now I had a private institution called Munjal University. We are just 2 years old. We already have 60 faculty. Everybody is a PhD. And we are only having about 800 students. We have bachelor program and MBA program, and we have brought in experiential learning, again, say, including having courses called Joy of Learning, so that education becomes a joy. Student can find his passion and leverage this interdisciplinary experiential learning. Whether you call it immersive or otherwise, and bring research happens from the very first semester, and it's completely inquiry-based learning, and people have also provision to move across different domains. So I think if we are serious, in spite of multiple constraints, in spite of, and for example, in the first year itself, because experiential learning is involved, 300 students, all of them were placed in industry for internship. Again, in cutting edge, already industry-based labs, even in Munjal, we have 5 industry-based labs from IBM to, Siemens to Shell to KPMG, again, engaged in courses and more. Another 50 institute companies, multinationals, Indian and private, international, have been engaged in giving internship. So the key point is the outcome-based accreditation system gives us an opportunity from defining our vision and mission, looking at our requirements, our local environment, and the type of market that we have. If we can effectively define it and work with both local and other agencies and bring in research into the academic process, I am absolutely sure, in spite of the constraints of the process, we do not have to blame anybody. We'll be able to do research, we'll be able to, and I'm happy to say, for example, in RVC, we have built a company, we had built at that time in 3 years, a complete facility for large area and flexible microelectronics, sensors, integrated circuits on glass, paper, plastic. No Indian institution has that facility. And it's a complete indigenous facility built in Bangalore, from Bangalore, small and medium entrepreneurs. So therefore, the key is, and unfortunately, the biggest problem is everybody blames our students are not good. Industries, I'm very sorry to say, I have had worked in industry, academics, R&D, and also some government policy. Industry has never invested in Indian academic system. Everybody wants a pie out of the system. And so, for example, we have 40 million people paying taxes. We have 20 million people in education. We do not get half a dollar, even if you say 60 rupees, 30 rupees per person coming into Indian academic system. And whereas the same multinationals have funded chairs, any other part of the world, they have funded projects. We do not even get $10 million into Indian academic system. And government has a biased process. It is, again, not come out of the mold that education, it has to fund across the board on merit. So it would want to substitute budget allocation as grant. So he mentioned about GAIN and RUSA. GAIN and RUSA can only go to the government institution. Private institution will not get it. So therefore, there is no point of talking about such schemes if it doesn't help anybody. Government has to clearly see that if some different government institution has to be closed, it has to be closed. Then let the good institution, whoever it is on merit, come up and allow good institutions to expand and then deliver quality education, rather than, because the 12th plan, 11th plan said equity and expansion. 12th plan is talking of employability and excellence, as the 4 E's that the government is talking in the plan. And if that has to happen, then the expansion should be for the good institutions to expand and not simply allow hundreds of, substandard, whether it's private or even public institution, to survive. And all the grant also in the name of research which is allocated, in turn is again given as a substitute for budget allocation because they could not allocate enough budget. So I think we all need to seriously sit together. This time is very short for us to truly engage, but it's still a wonderful opportunity. The whole world is looking at India, because already 1,000 companies have set up R&D, not because they want to do charity. And it's trillions of dollars of opportunity. I'm sure if we all put our heads together, we'll be able to find a solution. And we are happy to say that whether it was RVC or whether it's Munjal, we are trying to showcase that at subsidized cost, it's less than the actual cost of education, we are able to deliver quality education. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satyanarayana. I think you have touched upon two major issues by considering the private and public. ROSA and such schemes are given to support public institutions. But you must also agree that UGC is supporting a lot of private institutes also. They are giving a lot of projects and there are issues. Anyway, thank you very much. Now it is a privilege to invite Ms. Shashi Kiran, Senior Consultant NSDC. Anybody here? Madam, Shashi Kiran? Madam, I'm sorry.
My co-panelists. So a lot of my co-panelists have been talking about, can you hear me? So a lot of my co-panelists are honored to be here, and a lot of them have been talking about outcome-based training. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this, and a lot of people here on the panel have been talking about outcome-based trainings and assessments. One of the key enablers of based trainings is training based on required competencies for specific jobs. One of the enablers of this is the occupational standards. Occupational standards are competencies that a person is required to have to be able to perform a job well and effectively. And to support this is the district-wise. So these occupational standards are prepared based on the sector skill gap reports that are conducted periodically and which help identify the roles and the jobs that people require skilled people for. So NSTC created sector skill councils. Currently there are 37 sector skill councils, of which about 31 are operational. And these councils comprise of industry leaders, training experts, assessment experts, and also people from the medium, large, and small enterprises. So there are, how are occupational standards created? I'll take a minute on that, please. The industry and the council sit down together and they identify what are the major functions that a person needs to know to be able to perform well. There are several rounds of conversations around the country, in all the zones, across segments, where people put in their minds and then the standards are drafted. So there are various levels of rigor that these standards go through, and then there is the National Skills Qualifications Framework, levels of which are allocated to every qualification pack containing the National Occupation Standards. These levels denote the unskilled, the skilled, the highly skilled, and very, very highly skilled required for performing those jobs. So NSTC has training partners based on these occupational standards, which prepare the curriculum, and then they conduct trainings based on that. There are currently over 1,470 qualification packs containing over 7,000.5 occupational standards, And these qualification packs also contain the assessment criteria so as to have standardized assessments, and which typically in the skilling foray would have to be hybrid, both the training and the assessments, because these have to be, these are these are skills that have to be demonstrated before the assessments and during the assessments are held. There are online examinations wherever possible of certain sector skill councils. However, there is a lot of practical outcome-based demonstrations that people need to deliver before being assessed. Accreditation, of course, is, as everybody said, and there is no dispute about it, is very, very critical for outcome-based training. And there is a lot of focus on improving these occupational standards as the industry evolves, and so they are revised periodically.
Thank you, madam, for your brief presentation. Now, may I request Mr. Y.V. Satyakumar, member editorial board, please.
Somebody said standing at a lectern suits the teacher, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this august audience this afternoon. Actually, I have studied in national institutions, especially NITs and ISC, and then international institutions in USA. I had spent considerable time. So subjectivity is not limited to Indian education system. I can vouch for that, and I'm very familiar with that. Now, having said that, I really appreciate that this accreditation, evaluation, and quality, assessment, accreditation, and evaluation and quality. It is a very apt topic for the present moment in India. If you look at, there is a saying by somebody from Hungary. He said, intellectual capital is knowledge multiplied by effort, multiplied by talent, multiplied by morality. If any of these components is missing, the intellectual capital becomes null, void. So that is the problems the actually knowledge economies face, and India is going through that because there is a lot of expectations, as somebody had said this morning. So when I actually personally although I had studied in all of these institutions, I had the opportunity to work in private institutions ever since I returned. Last 8 years I have been with 4 universities in NCR area and in Vijayawada. So I'm very familiar with the challenges that they face being self-supporting institutions, and the compromises they make, the pressures that are the administrators face, and I'm familiar with all of these. So when you look at the end of the day, accreditation is a concept that really looks critically at what is going on and whether that should be going on, or if it is not going right, what should happen. That is what essentially is accreditation. So in the accreditation process, if you look at, there are 2 things. One is the system, that is the purpose, and the stakeholders, especially the external stakeholders. Stakeholders are there in the internal system also. So this is the 2 broad people, that 2 broad components that you look at during accreditation. Within the system, you have people, that is faculty staff, you have students, you have administration, and sometimes management, if they are actually actively involved in the running of the institution. And stakeholders, that is external stakeholders, the parents, and the employers, the alumni, and the society at large. So these are the external stakeholders. So basically the first one is the systems are concerned with active participants, and the other ones are passive participants. So passive participants are waiting for the output to come, or the outcome to come from the system. So within the system, if you look at, you have the people, then you have the processes that are created by them or for them, or ultimately the efforts that are put forth by them. So for that, are they ready to put forth the efforts? And now what are the outcomes? To assess the outcomes is not very easy. And I was listening to Meritrack's presentation and assessment. In the day of open learning, assessment schemes are very relevant and very important. They should be very objective, and they should be credible, and they should really assess what should be assessed, not something else. And right now the problem with the digitized version of assessment schemes is that it is limited to assessing only certain possibilities like objective type questions. As he said, scanning something and then sending somewhere. That is not too much of a drastic difference between what is happening right now, except that the assessor is somewhere else. So there is some little bit of objectivity to the process. And somebody else had pointed out about crowdsourcing, and so it is like popularity ranking. Popularity ranking would assume that the person is familiar with the content, so that you cannot assume in a higher education setting. That is the problem. Next, NSQF, that Ms. Garima today morning, she was giving address about that, and as well as Mrs. Sasikiran just now. So this NSQF, that is a qualification framework, is going to, I think, upset the way we look at higher education system in future. Not immediately, maybe 5 to 10 years down the lane, where degrees slowly become, the rigid course structures become irrelevant, and the skills become much more important. What is it that they have gained? Did they gain what they are supposed to? So now, having said that, and then Dr. R.K. Suri talked about in the previous session about the profit versus non-profit. This actually is the crux of the problem facing the private education system in India, where the dilemmas, the ambivalence in the management, the differences between the vision and the practices. This actually confuses administrators, confuses teachers, confuses students. Actually, students sometimes take advantage of that. But I'm going to talk about the challenges that I have seen in the private education system in the last 8 years. And I would really appreciate this audience has been very kind, and especially the moderators in the morning also were very accommodating. And I was a little bit apprehensive whether I would be able to put forth these ideas. And that means the maturity of India has really gone farther than I had been used to in 1980s when I was a student. So the people, let me talk about people. Pareto's principle, that is 80% of, in an organization, 80% contribute 20%. That actually very much applies. Actually, I think you should modify. 90% of the work is done by 10% of the people. This is what I have seen. And this is, as a result, those that are in the 10%, there is a lot of demotivation. And there is a lack of connection with the organization. This is not uniform. Some of these, please, I'm not trying to generalize. These are some broad observations that I'm making. Some of the challenges that when accreditation occurs, the accreditation has to have internal process where integrity is there in the process. Then we are presenting the right data to the external agents. External agents don't have that much time. They come for 2-3 days and have a little bit of exposure to what is going on. And they go mostly by the data that you give. So the data you give, if it does not have integrity, then you are misleading, and you are not deluding them, you are deluding yourself, and at the end it is becoming a hollow system. So that we have to avoid. So the lack of clear goals, and then I'm talking about the faculty, they don't have very clear goals about what they want to do. Cauteries are there sometimes, and then concomitant protections are there. And there is a lot of huge turnover in some certain regions. They're just there for 6 months, 5 months, they are gone for a better job. So there is a lack of alignment with the organization purpose. And most of the PhDs, once they get PhD, they don't have further interest in research. Somebody says in the morning that is just to get a job and to get promotion, whatever it is. So PhDs, unfortunately, there is the talk of PhDs are also given not on the right criterion or on the right basis. But anyway, and then there are in the multiple appointments are also there. Some faculty are serving in different colleges at the same time without the knowledge of the other institution, ghost faculty at the time of accreditation. And some other faculty over workload is also there. Because they don't want to give, stick to the norms that the AHT prescribes, 1:15, 1:12, depending on the UG, PG programs.
Another 2 minutes, please.
And they are lucky if they are in pay scale sometimes. And sometimes unethical lower pay is also given. Probation confirmation more with quarterly connections than with work. Work ethic is also not very strong. But anyway, with the students what happens? I give you attendance, I give you marks, you give me good feedback. So this is hurting, and this shows up at the time of placements because the student has not learned what he is supposed to do. And with regard to the staff, technical staff, underqualified somewhat, and sometimes very poor communication skills. They cannot teach the student in the labs. And there is not very strong SDP, that is staff development program. Faculty development programs are there to some extent or other. But staff development programs also have to be there because they teach the practical aspects of the curriculum. And they don't have too much exposure to the industry. and are the latest trends. Now let us come to the students.
Yeah, 1 minute
They are
more,
first
please.
about job nowadays with the pressures from Asian countries or Far East. And attendance levels are also very poor in the classes. And performance sometimes is very questionable because they are getting free grades. So the assessment at the time of placement, they are saying, okay, they are getting 80%, it doesn't mean much. So something has to be done about that. And poor attitude also, respect for teachers has gone down in the last 30, 40 years. We used to touch the feet of our first standard teacher also, 20 years, 15 years down the lane, but that is now past. And when it comes to administration, it should be very facilitative, not hierarchy oriented. And sometimes parallel administrations are also flourishing. Parallel administrations are also flourishing. So that actually confuses the administration that is in place, what to do. Because they are more in touch with the management than the regular administration. These are some of the challenges that I have come across. And with regard to the just last point, sir, if you give me just 1 minute, I'll quickly rush through this. Monitoring, internal monitoring, that is exam system. Sometimes papers are set by people that don't know that stream, but because they are controller of exams or whoever is in charge, they will bring all their friends and they will set the papers. So the assessment is process suffers because of that. And if assessment is very strict, they might cause some violence to the teacher concerned or the evaluator concerned also. And when you come at the boards also, boards that govern these should really be vigilant about the process that should be in place, what should be the outcomes and all that. And they should not be just go by, if I do yes tomorrow I'll be on the board, otherwise I'll be out of the board. Then they are not doing the job. Then academic freedom is almost non-existent. If it is existent, if it is there in some institutions, it may not be used properly also sometimes. So value education is something that India needs to really seriously go for to overcome some of these problems. And with regard to the external vigilance, that is the accreditation bodies, they should be much more vigilant. They should also, there is the talk of these fiscal considerations, all of these should go away. Because that is only then Indian education system can really improve. And institution, actually mentors sometimes are appearing as chair of the accreditation bodies. So there is a conflict of interest.
Thank you, Sir
Some
Kumar.
of these are the challenges. And so just one sentence.
It's already running time. Please.
Okay. Quality is not an act, it is a habit. That is what Aristotle said. And what I say is quality is not a front, it is the core of the system. Then only the system flourishes. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Kumar.
obliging
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thank all the panelists for briefing their views. Now it is open for discussion. We will spend another 5 minutes. Please. Yeah, please. Yes, that is true. That is very much true. Yes, please. Please be very brief, please.
We talked about accreditation, we talked about assessment. Did we talk about what it means to the student? Anyone on the dais? That is what is relevant.
Yeah, please.
I think already everybody had mentioned about outcome-based education. Just to mention, as we said, when I say, for example, in one college, even if, what it meant, when, for example, the last year in one of the institutions, top rankers in mechanical and civil engineering were people from lateral entry. People who had never even come from homes where nobody had degrees have joined companies like Goldman Sachs, and McKinsey, and also cutting edge companies. So, and for example, students who had never thought of anything are today building solar cars as a team. So I think every institution is trying to see, as we say, as he already mentioned, most of the students do not come for the degree, but do not come for education, but come for a meal ticket or a job ticket. So transformation is our job. We are all at it, but it's a very tough job.
We all belongs to the same boat. We all understand what is it, but we should define very clearly to the student, to the community, why we are working. This assessment And accreditation has a very wide platform. It has been working for the last 15, 20 years. It has not been propagated to the student very thorough. We should redefine it.
In fact, the accreditation, NAC accreditation and NBA takes care of the data given by the institute, and also physically they are checking. 3 days, in fact, is not sufficient. But if we extend it for 10 days, where is the human resource? Even if you apply today, the NAC committee is meeting after 6 months. And it has really become difficult to evaluate exactly. But by and large, it is respected evaluation. That we have to agree. Any other, please? Yeah.
With all due respect, there were few sweeping statements like engineering admission rates are dropping. This is not correct, whether it's the IIT entrance examination or BITSAT for BITS Pilani and related campus or MIT University or wherever. Admission trend is rising. We are not able to meet the requirement of the students. Number of seats are limited. And if you keep on bashing private system, let me tell you, BITS Pilani is A NAC grade, MIT is A NAC grade. All the private institutions who are certified by NAC as A grade, how can we keep on bashing them? If private sector is not there, Government of India will not be able to fulfill the desire of all the engineering students to get engineering education. Let me be very frank about it. And the growth is in private sector. So let us stop. Let us play equal playing field. Let the performance tell who is better, whether the government sector or private sector. I come from all the sectors, so I am speaking without any bias. Thank you very much.
In fact, when accreditation is carried out by agencies like UGC, NAC and NBA, there are a large number of institutes which got A grade from the private sector. There are also a large number from the public sector. I don't think there is any differentiation is shown in the form of private and public. Anybody else? Yeah, last one, please.
Sir, my question is to the panel, anyone can answer. Sir, accreditation, NBA or the NAC, it is an equality stamp. We all agree with. But the question is, the scenario which is arising with the institutions, whether it may be in a private institution or it may be in a government institution. The real ground reality is, everyone, I think, they agree with me. There is a shortage of the students' admission on one side, and there is a shortage of the faculty on the other side. Then the quality of, yes, the teachers and as well as the students is a big question mark. And the issue is so complex, but still under these circumstances, do we require really an accreditation? And the another part is, the accreditation, everybody knows how the accreditation quality is going on reality. Of course, once again, from the institution or the NBA expert team, the donor or the receiver, so that is a big question mark which I don't want. And it is also said, in the global competitive world, it is only the quality is the survival. And even the Darwin's theory also it is said, survival is the fittest, right? And in this cutting edge technology, why we require an external agency to give a stamp of quality? So that is what my question. And the second question is whether means are important or end results are important. This is my second question. Thank you very much.
I think, first of all, I answer your second question. Not only the results, means are also equally important. That everybody agrees. There is no dispute over that. But regarding going for accreditation, I think if you go for that, there is always a competitive spirit. There is always need to meet the requirements. There is an attempt at least towards meeting the target. If you say that accreditation is not required, I don't think there will be any improvement in the standards. At least there is, if I feel that some accreditation team is coming to the institute, there is a huge work carried out, either in the form of improving the ambience either in the form of recruitment, either in the form of refinement of the system and all. If we don't go for that, that sort of things will not happen. That is for sure. But the only thing is, it can be refined. The accreditation process can be refined. And if it is need to be done exactly, very precisely, more precisely, you have to spend more time in the campus. And it is almost it has become difficult even for 3 days. That we have been observing for a long time. Yeah, any other? Yeah.
That regarding the shortage of teachers, it's a national problem. Even in IITs also there is a shortage of around 30 to 40%. Even in NITs also is more than 40% shortage of faculty. And in private organizations, of course, there is acute shortage of faculty. So this is a national problem. And here we all should come forward for a solution. Now, first of all, who will be opting for this profession? Earlier, decades back, this was chosen as one of the best professions. But now, people come out of compulsion, not out of choice. This is one big issue. Secondly, in order to come to this profession, one has to have MTech, I'm talking about the engineering side, BTech, MTech, then PhD. It takes, after BTech, it takes around